Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at the effects of a Brexit on the continent, and certainly the effects already felt, even if it's remain or leave this side of the channel. We're talking about it with Karine Berger, French member of Parliament from the Socialist Party, communications consultant. François Chardon is with us. Peter Kleppe of Open Europe is with us from Brussels. And Evan O'Connell, Vice Chair of Labour in Paris, who is for Remain. Peter Kleppe, just before the break, Evan was saying how he doesn't believe in a domino effect should the British vote to leave the European Union. He said the only country where maybe there could be some kind of referendum would be the Netherlands, but he didn't see that happening.
Well, I agree with him on the short term, but I do think on the longer term, if the European Union keeps on trying to use every crisis as an opportunity to grab powers, it basically will reap what it has sowed. I mean, if you look at the refugee crisis, you can't blame Brussels for that, but still, Brussels, the EU level, in cahoots with Angela Merkel, basically tried to use this crisis to get control over national asylum policy, in a bid to relocate people within the Schengen zone. I mean, in a passport-free zone, you cannot force anyone to stay anywhere. So it didn't make any sense. It was just there to
but everybody ignored that.
Sorry?
But most countries ignored those quotas anyway.
Well, and they will never be applied. So indeed, they're basically empty, but still they created a lot of anger and anti-EU sentiment in Central and Eastern Europe. And that is very unfortunate. And it basically boils down to the same thing, that the EU just doesn't manage, it can't keep itself from basically just not reaching out to areas where it shouldn't be making policy. The EU is a project focused on removing barriers to trade. That's a very ambitious thing. There's nothing. Isn't it to
also prevent Europeans from killing each other? Wasn't that the part of the original design?
Exactly.
There was a little issue.
Boosting trade through commerce, very importantly.
But it's not at all about peace on the continent?
Exactly. Boosting peace through commerce. When people trade with each other, they're less likely to go into conflict with each other. That's a great thing. From the moment you go with, I mean, you deal with asylum policy, it's already very difficult for national politicians to try to convince citizens from policy option A or B, let alone for officials in Brussels. You can't blame the officials for that. It's just a very sensitive debate that needs to be dealt with at the national level, because democracy is a national thing. The media is largely covering the capitals. That's where the scrutiny is of the opposition as well. So that's the reason why sensitive decisions about asylum, about budgets, about transfers need to happen at the national level. The EU can do a lot of good, but it needs to focus on removing barriers to trade.
All right, reactions have come in on the hashtag F24 debate. Why did Europe fall out of love with the EU? Lack of democracy, ignoring the will of the people, German resurgence, the euro bankrupting member nations, etc. Karine Berger, your reaction?
My reaction that the kind of discourse that we have just heard is exactly the reason why people want to leave European Union. They just hear about trade and economic and sometimes employment, but not so much unemployment, by the way. And it's not that the European project is not at all an economic one. I'm not such a Marxist person that I believe that history is built by economy.
Wasn't it originally, what is it, steel and coal?
It is a very simple idea that Europe has been through 2 world wars in the 20th century, and it was just a terrible, terrible century. And some very good men and women decided after 1945 that it was over, that we needed to live together, to live, not to kill ourselves. And that the reason why they believed, these men and women believed that we can we can build this union. I'm sorry, if we keep on speaking only about economic issues, and I'm an economist, by the way, if we keep on speaking only about economic issues, the person who are voting in my region will say to me in the next years, okay, stop. I don't believe anymore in what you are saying. I want to hear about my security. I want to hear about my future. I want to hear about my education. I want to hear about the way we try to protect ourselves against wars and against all the danger that globalization is bringing to Europe.
François Chardon, the economy is being talked about in the Brexit debate. Numbers are being thrown about by both sides. And it seems as though it's an argument over whether or not Brussels has Britain's best interests in protecting it from outside forces. It's the argument between free trade and protectionism.
Yes, and you get a sense also that somehow this there's a bit of rationality with economics that makes, for instance, the city fear very much a Brexit. And also on this side of the channel, you get sometimes a bit of Schadenfreude that people think that perhaps Paris could gain a bit as a marketplace from Brexit, with certain banks relocating part of their staff dealing with the EU countries.
We're also seeing, I read front page of the Wall Street Journal this Monday, UK hedge fund managers who are giving generously to the Leave campaign.
Yeah, well, you get also all sorts of paradox happening sometimes. People do have also personal opinion, and they certainly feel that many crises recently have been really poorly handled at the EU level, and that is why I think they feel that they can regain sovereignty through Brexit, which in my view is completely silly. But still, you get this gut feeling, I think, in this perception, very much so. What struck me this weekend, there was an interview in the Financial Times with French writer Michel Houellebecq, who said, "I really like England. I'd really like it to leave to signal the independence movement."
Evan O'Connell, you're...
First of all, I'd like to respond to Peter, if I may. I think that, and bringing in some of what Karine said as well, when you're building a single market, you need common rules. When you have a single market for goods and services, you need common rules on working time, you need common rules on environmental regulations, you need common rules on whether it's food labeling or chemicals or a whole host of issues that mean that actually you can't just say we only want a free trade or a free trade area or a single market. You have to have more than that. When you have freedom of movement, that means that you have no borders internally, which means that you have to have common external borders. And the issue is that no one has actually made this case. No one has actually stood up and said, okay, if we want the benefits of being in Europe, whether it's freedom of movement of people, whether it's freedom of movement of capital, whether it's being able to sell your, say you're a small businessman, you're able to sell your goods in Germany or Italy or wherever. What that means is also having a common set of rules, a common economic governance, and no one's made that case. And that's why we are here today, because no one's actually explained to people that in order to have benefits, you have to have sacrifices as well.
Let me put this differently to Peter Kleppe. When we see that right now in Britain, there's a lot of people worried about the possible closure of the big steel mills in South Wales, in Port Talbot. A lot of the people there say they want to vote for Brexit because they feel as though Brussels hasn't protected them enough against Chinese dumping. Should Brussels be doing more to protect jobs?
Well, it's interesting, right, to see that also in Britain there is some protectionism. It's not just in France, so we should indeed leave these cliches behind. I don't think by imposing tariff barriers you can actually protect jobs. You can also delay perhaps the number of jobs being lost. If you really want to boost jobs, what you should do is to reduce tariffs. So European consumers will have to pay less for imports from other parts of the world. Companies can import more cheaply, can produce more cheaply, thereby gain competitiveness.
Even if certain countries are selling at a loss, like the Chinese?
Well, there's a lot of economic theories out there, but if you shield yourself out from the world, and if you say, okay, let's try to mimic or worse protectionist competitor, when they subsidize, when they have tariffs, we also do it, then you can imagine that we will end up in a very protectionist Europe, which will hit consumers hard. I admit that there are painful transition costs. I think we should definitely take that serious, but we should definitely try to move at least in the right direction. What made Europe great was the fact that you could actually trade cross borders, that producers are enjoying a high level of rule of law, at least compared to countries like India, like China. So we have a lot of strengths, but at the moment the regulations are too burdensome. The tariff barriers are still too high, and especially in the area of debt. Of course, Europe has way too much, both public and private debt. It needs to restructure its banking system. But I mean, that's not impossible. We can do that maybe over 5, 10, 15 years. But the wrong recipe would be to give in to the populist protectionist, I think.
All right. The argument over a Brexit, most big decision makers where you are in Brussels have been biting their lower lip and staying quiet to avoid a backlash from British voters either way. However, over the weekend, the French economy minister weighing in. Here's what Emmanuel Macron had to say. Leaving the EU would mean the Guernseyfication of the UK, a reference to those small Channel Islands, Guernsey and Jersey, which are just off the coast of Normandy, which would then be a little country on the world scale. It would isolate itself and become a trading post, an arbitration place at Europe's border. Karine Berger, do you agree with Emmanuel Macron?
I think Emmanuel is a little too hard on this point. I don't think that UK would become such a little island after, would there be a Brexit? Britain would lose a lot from an economic point of view, clearly. Britain would, I believe, lose a lot from an historical point of view, but well, I am not a UK voter. But I don't believe that we are in charge in France to give some lessons of these kinds to UK. I just want to try to convince UK that a very important point, if UK wants to stay in European Union, it has to decide to stay really in European Union.
Yeah, you gave an interview to Eurosceptic where you said you're a little bit annoyed at the fact that they're always getting concession after concession.
Exactly. I don't believe that we can just stay in a middle situation where UK wants to stay, but at its own conditions. Because in that case, it's all the European project that is going to be weakened.
Well, France has its own conditions. It gets to run a big budget deficit, for instance.
I must say, I'm one of the person who would try to convince my own country not to put conditions, especially for the agricultural pack. But anyway, the condition that has been put on the table by Mr. Cameron are very, very strong conditions. I mean, there would be a difference of treatment between European workers and UK workers, which is really a new point of view, let's put it that way, of the future of Europe. And I must say, on this point, I would like the European to discuss again whether there would be no Brexit, no Brexit. Maybe.
All right, reaction on #F24 debate. Tell me that Brexit fears have nothing to do with a stalled EU economy, negative bond rates, and 2 bank bailouts then. The fears on this continent are real, and while the French foreign minister is worried for Britain, the German foreign minister is worried for Europe.
One thing you can say with certainty is that if Britain votes to leave the European Union, it would not just continue as 28 minus 1, But it would shake the European Union, and it would require a concerted effort to ensure its stability and that this successful process of integration lasting for decades doesn't turn into disintegration.
And when we asked you on Twitter, would the EU be stronger or weaker without Britain, 73% said weaker, 27% said stronger. When this campaign began, people in France were joking, well, if they don't know what they want, why don't they just leave? We're not hearing so many jokes now in the final week, are we?
Yeah, I think this is getting sobering and more like a real threat because of the potential ripple effect. The uncertainty for many companies is certainly worrisome. And you've seen the movement on the markets that clearly indicate a nervosity with regards to the result of the vote this week. So
have you sensed a change, François Chardon, in how the French view the British through this debate?
No, I'm afraid that is not soon to happen. I mean, we're perfect frenemies.
It's a long history.
Yeah, it's
Frenemies is a good term, I think.
the entente cordiale will remain, whatever the results.
Because it is an entente cordiale. On the one hand,
it is.
We're big rivals, especially in rugby. On the other hand, French and British defense ties are interlinked more than ever today.
And those won't change, whatever happens, I think.
Whatever happens.
Defence ties will not change, because I think defence ties go beyond the EU. I think that it depends. Where it could change is if the future of the UK as a single political entity is self-threatened. If the UK manages to stay together post-Brexit, then the UK will remain a geopolitical force working alongside France. If the UK spins off into Scotland leaving, God knows what happens with Northern Ireland, Wales, then you've got a little rump England that no longer really deserves its place at the UN Security Council. You've got
little rump England is 85% of the population of the British Isles.
But you can very easily see the Germans saying, they're even smaller now, why don't we have a seat? You can see the Indians saying, why don't we have a seat at the table? They don't really mean much of anything at all. That being said, British and French ties will continue. I just fear that that under a Brexit, you will have some of those little England tendencies that will come out, especially if someone like Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister. This sense that, if you like, the return of English nationalism, which will inevitably lead to a rise in Scottish nationalism, and which will threaten the UK even further.
That's very interesting, by the way. That is, we are in front of a European issue relationship, and it has a strike on the links that Britain have on their own union.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really strange. I mean, it's from a European perspective, it's very interesting to see that in a certain way, and I don't want to be too simple, but in a certain way, European Union is a way Britain sees itself. It sees its union, even if, of course, the union is much older than the European Union, and that's very interesting to see the link. I would add something to what you have said, which is very important. Defense. There are only 2 countries in the European Union right now that has a defense power an army able to. Both to go outside our borders and of course to protect our common borders.
Absolutely.
It's UK and France. So, of course, from the defense point of view, from a French point of view, the defense issue is a main issue that we want to see at the end of this week.
And your prediction, Kelly?
Maybe I'm too much from southeast of France, but I must say that I could believe that Brexit has a chance. due to the fact that I hear what people say in my region, and it's the same question as which are risen in UK right now.
All right, the opposite argument made on Facebook. Many people have been repelled by the selective xenophobia of the Brexit campaign, concluding there's little option than to vote to remain in the EU for fear of being tarred with the same brush. It's, of course, something we're going to be following for you all week. The France 24 debate will be in London on Friday, and we'll be covering, of course, on the day itself. I want to thank Evan O'Connell. I want to thank as well Karine Berger, François Chardon, and Peter Kleppe in Brussels. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Hala Moeddin.
Hello there.
We've talked a lot about the tone of the campaign, especially in the wake of the murder of 41-year-old first-term Labour MP Jo Cox.
And that's certainly something that has been trending online today, particularly in view of that recall of Parliament, a very different atmosphere in the Houses of Parliament. We saw tributes paid with the Yorkshire roses to mark her seat in the House. And even the debate itself, normally marred by people yelling over the top of each other, very respectful. And that's continued to raise hopes of a change in tone of the debate. Sadly, online, we haven't been seeing much of that being replicated. Of course, this morning when Baroness Varsi switched sides, she became a target of abuse online for that switching of sides.
Let me ask Karine Berger about this, because Evan O'Connell at the start of the show said that the abuse seems to be directed more towards women than men. Do you agree?
I agree, but maybe I'm not the correct person to say that. I must say that the attacks, especially on internet, when you are a woman MP, are really more, of course, more sexual and more aggressive.
There is an element of that. A lot of people angry with Baroness Varsi, saying she was never really a very prominent part of the campaign. It doesn't excuse, though, the tweets that she was receiving. A lot of them fairly Islamophobic in nature. She's been retweeting sections of that. But it isn't just the women or the Remain voters who've come in for this. Right-wing commentator Alex Massey came in for a lot of fierce criticism after that comment piece that he published on The Spectator in the wake of Jo Cox's murder. He answers a lot of those criticisms in this piece on The Spectator today. He argues that Nigel Farage and his motley crew do not speak for everybody who wants to leave the EU. But unfortunately, unless the Leave campaign distinguish themselves from these arguments, they risk being tarred with the same brush. Now, he is a right-wing commentator in favour of remaining in the EU, but he says you need to make these arguments eloquently. The UK, modern Britain, is not such a bad place, but unless you acknowledge that, you risk being dragged into this mudslinging argument. Another prominent commentator in the UK, this time from the left wing, has also spoken out on behalf of Leave voters who he says arguably have been betrayed by this nasty campaign. In his morning monologue, he said there is more to supporting Brexit than being a racist. He says he feels very sorry for people who have good reasons to want to leave the EU, and they must feel, quote, rotten, betrayed, dispossessed and underrepresented by the campaign as it stands. And we do forget that, you know, people do have legitimate reasons for wanting to leave. And one of the the best examples I found is this, the leader in The Spectator, which talks about, it doesn't go into the debate we've had on immigration, which is all we hear about, Turkey wanting to join, millions of people flooding our shores and so on and so forth. It actually raises arguably some very valid points, things about the bureaucracy, the EU's failure to tackle problems, to tackle the refugee crisis. It highlights the fact that EU inaction arguably has caused a surge in people trafficking, the one-size-fits-all financial policy does not work in Europe, given the financial divide between North and South. And most damning of all, it says David Cameron went into the EU negotiations with a very strong hand, a very strong position, and the fact that he came out with reforms which are not enough shows that the EU is not capable of reform. So these are good arguments that have not been tackled by the other campaigns.
All right, so endorsement for the Leave campaign. There have been endorsements as well for Remain. Just very briefly, because we're out of time. One of the more, you were telling me earlier about...
Well, a lot of people are appalled by the level of debate, and one of them here is Benson. He's not happy at all, and he's just one of tens of thousands of cats against Brexit. This is what's been trending online today, cats against Brexit.
That is a cruel low blow, Hala, bringing the cats in.
Very eloquent arguments. It's not
is
fun
nothing sacred.
Being outside looking in.
It's out of the bag.
The cat is out of the bag.
Many thanks, Hala Moeddine. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.